piece of the Challenger space shuttle has been discovered. This piece was found by divers who are working on a documentary for the History Channel.
Finding a piece of history is always exciting, but finding a piece of the Challenger wreckage brings up a lot of deep emotions and new questions. Divers recently went down to a site off the coast of Florida and were shocked by what their instruments detected. They found a large section of the shuttle buried in the silt, and the thermal tiles were still clearly visible. The data they gathered suggests there is much more to the debris field than anyone realized. It is a massive discovery that reminds us how much of that mission is still scattered across the sea floor. New discoveries change Challenger history. Instead of wings and a propeller, they saw a flat and heavy structure. It turned out to be a section of the Space Shuttle Challenger that measured at least 15 feet by 15 feet. This is a key detail, because most of the wreckage from the 1986 disaster was thought to be accounted for, or buried so deep that it would never be found. The team was using side-scan sonar and high-definition underwater cameras to map the area. What most people do not realize is that the ocean floor near Cape Canaveral is a graveyard of many different missions and wrecks. But when the divers saw the 8-inch square thermal tiles, they knew they had found something special. These tiles are unique to the shuttle program and were designed to protect the orbiter from the extreme heat of re-entry. Finding them after all this time is a huge deal for history. The divers were working in about 100 feet of water, where the currents are strong and the sand is always moving. This is where the story takes a hard left, because the instruments they were using started picking up readings that baffled the team. The sonar showed that the piece was partially buried, but the metal underneath seemed to be in a different condition than other fragments found years ago. There are still many rumors in the air, but what many can confirm is that this find has reignited interest in the mission. The team had to be very careful, because any wreckage from a NASA mission is still government property. They documented everything with their cameras and sent the footage to experts. Nobody expected this to happen, but the discovery was confirmed by NASA officials shortly after. It was a moment that brought back a lot of memories for people who remember that cold morning in January. The section found is likely part of the belly of the orbiter, where the heat shielding was the thickest. See, the way the shuttle broke apart meant that pieces were scattered over 486 square nautical miles. That is a massive area to search, and it is no wonder that pieces are still turning up 40 years later. The divers noticed that the biology of the ocean had started to take over the wreckage. Fish and other sea life were using the metal as a reef. But the real kicker is that the instruments picked up strange magnetic anomalies around the site. This could be due to the specific titanium alloys used in the shuttle construction. It is not that simple though, because the readings were much stronger than they should have been for a piece of that size. The researchers started wondering if there were more pieces buried deep beneath the sand nearby. Something strange is hiding under the Atlantic sand that the sensors are just beginning to map out. Cold morning that changed space travel. To understand why this new discovery matters so much, we have to look back at the day it all started. On January 28 in 1986, the world was watching as 7 heroes prepared to go into orbit. It was a cold morning in Florida, and that was the red flag that everyone missed. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and icicles were hanging from the launch pad. For starters, the Space Shuttle Challenger was never meant to fly in those conditions. The solid rocket boosters had joints that were sealed with rubber O-rings. These rings were supposed to expand and seal the gaps so that hot gas could not escape. But on that morning, the rubber became brittle and hard, like a piece of plastic. When the engines ignited, the rings failed to do their job. This allowed a plume of fire to reach the external fuel tank, which was filled with liquid hydrogen and oxygen. Just 73 seconds into the flight, the unthinkable happened. The shuttle broke apart in a cloud of white smoke and fire. Everyone's obsessed with the explosion, but it was actually a structural failure caused by the fire. The orbiter was torn to pieces by the force of the air as it moved at nearly 2 times the speed of sound. The crew compartment was thrown clear of the fireball, and it stayed intact as it began a long fall toward the ocean. Looking back, it is one of the most heartbreaking moments in the history of exploration. The compartment fell for about 2.5 minutes before it hit the water at over 200 miles per hour. The force of the impact was so great that it was likely fatal for everyone inside instantly. NASA immediately started a massive recovery operation to find out what went wrong. They used ships and submarines to search the floor of the Atlantic. They managed to find the crew module and the remains of the astronauts at a depth of about 100 feet. They also found the right solid rocket booster, which had the faulty seal. But even with all that work, only about half of the shuttle was ever found. Thousands of tons of high-tech metal and tiles disappeared into the deep sea. So here is the deal. For decades, people thought the rest of the debris was gone forever. The ocean is a harsh place, and saltwater usually eats away at metal very fast. But the Challenger was made of special materials designed for the vacuum of space and the heat of the atmosphere. A lot of people are confused about how so much of the shuttle could just vanish without a trace, small parts that caused huge damage. The science behind the failure is something that engineers still study today. The Rogers Commission was the group in charge of finding the truth after the disaster. They discovered that the O-rings were the main problem, but there was a catch they did not see coming. The culture at NASA had become focused on keeping a tight schedule, and they ignored the warnings from the engineers who built the rockets. One engineer named Roger Boyce Joly had warned his bosses the night before that the launch should be stopped. He knew the cold would be a problem, but the pressure to launch was too high and they went ahead anyway. That was a mistake that cost 7 lives. When the investigators looked at the recovered pieces, they saw exactly how the fire had burned through the metal. It was like a blowtorch hitting a thin sheet of aluminum. The heat reached over 5,000 degrees in a matter of seconds. Many are not seeing the truth here, because they think the whole shuttle exploded like a bomb. It was more like the structural support failed, and the wind did the rest. The tiles that were found recently are a big part of this story. Each tile had a specific serial number and a place on the orbiter. By looking at the tiles on the new piece, experts can tell exactly where it came from. This piece was likely from the bottom of the craft. And get this, the crazy part is that the tiles are still stuck to the metal after 40 years in the salt water. Usually, the glue would have failed or the tiles would have been crushed. But these pieces are tough. They were made of high-purity silica fibers that are mostly air. One of the most overlooked aspects of the recovery is how the divers back in the 80s had to work in zero visibility. They were feeling around in the dark for jagged pieces of metal. Now we have robots and high-tech sensors that can see through the mud and sand. The instruments used by the recent dive team showed that the metal was not as corroded as it should be. This is a massive caveat for scientists who study how things break down in the ocean. It means the materials used for space travel are even stronger than we thought. The data from the new wreckage is showing us things about the impact that we never knew before. Deep water signals defy logic. As if things could not get any weirder, the instruments on the new expedition started reporting signals that made the divers stop in their tracks. When they ran their metal detectors and magnetic sensors over the site, they found a very strong electromagnetic field. This was not expected from a piece of aluminum and ceramic. Some people think this is a sign of something strange, but the real shocker was when they realized the metal might be acting like a battery. In certain conditions, different types of metal and salt water can create a small electrical charge, but the strength of this signal was unusual. Hands down, it is one of the most mysterious parts of the new find. The divers also used an ROV, which is a remote-controlled robot, to look into the cracks of the wreckage. They found that the piece was resting on top of other materials that did not look like they belonged to the shuttle. It turns out that this part of the ocean is full of junk from many different eras. But then things really started to spiral when the sonar showed a hollow space beneath the main piece of metal. This suggests that more of the shuttle might be buried deep in the sand, and it could be in good condition. That was the moment everything shifted for the research team. They realized they were not just looking at a scrap of metal, but a time capsule. One of the instruments picked up a weird acoustic echo when they bounced sound waves off the wreckage. It sounded like there was something inside the metal, or perhaps a specific type of gas trapped in the structure. Little did they know that this find would spark a whole new wave of theories. Some people on the internet started saying that the wreckage was emitting a haunting radiation, but that was quickly debunked by the team. The real mystery is why this piece stayed hidden for so long in an area that is frequently traveled by boats and other divers. It seems that the shifting sands of the Atlantic had kept it covered up until a recent storm moved the seafloor. The divers had to be careful because the site is now considered a memorial. They did not move anything or take any samples without permission. The plot took a major turn when they found a piece of a wing nearby that seemed to have been moved by the current over several miles. What they found next in the deeper silt was even more confusing than the magnetic signals. Future of space safety starts here. Looking back at the Challenger and the newest discoveries, it is clear that we are still learning from the past. The instruments used by the divers showed that the wreckage still holds a lot of energy and history. Against all logic, the ocean has preserved a part of our journey to the stars. This find helps us remember the crew and the risks they took to explore the unknown. It is not just about metal and tiles, but about the people who were on board. The lessons learned from the O-ring failure and the structural breakup have made every flight since then safer. When the Columbia disaster happened in 2003, it reminded everyone that space is still a dangerous place. But the spirit of exploration never died. The new wreckage site is a place of reflection. Nobody saw this coming, but the discovery has brought a sense of closure to some and a new spark of curiosity to others. The thing is, I wonder if there are more secrets waiting for us out there. Are we missing a key detail about how the shuttle fell, or what else might be buried in the Atlantic sand? The experts say that only about 5% of the ocean has been explored. That means there could be hundreds of pieces of our history waiting to be found by the next team of divers. The instruments we have today are getting better every year, and they allow us to see through the darkness of the deep. So here is the part that everyone misses. Every piece of wreckage is a puzzle piece that tells us more about the limits of our technology. The Challenger will always be a part of the American story, and this new find proves that we are not done telling it. It all came crashing down when the SEALs failed, but the memory of the mission lives on in every new discovery. We have to keep looking and keep learning so that we never make the same mistakes again. The ocean is big, and it is deep, but it cannot hide the truth forever. As we move forward with new rockets and missions to the Moon and Mars, we carry the legacy of the Challenger with us. It is a reminder that the path to the stars is paved with both triumph and tragedy. Will we ever find the rest of the shuttle, or is it lost to the deep sea forever? Tell us what you think in the comments. If you loved this mystery, make sure to like and subscribe for more.